Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has failed to weaken the United States and NATO or overthrow Ukraine's democratic government. Latvian Foreign Minister Baiba Braže emphasized. However, according to her, the Kremlin leader will now attempt to achieve through peace negotiations what he could not accomplish in his war against Ukraine.
Putin interferes in the affairs of other countries. He wants to control both their territory and the political choices of their governments. But he did not get what he wanted in Ukraine during these 3 years of war. Now, he will try to get it through the peace talks. So it is crucial to keep this perspective in mind in any deal we discuss or agree upon. Baiba Braže, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Latvia, in an interview with the Associated Press.
The fact that the US has begun negotiations with Russia does not necessarily mean these talks will bring any real change, according to Czech Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky. He stressed that Europe must not remain a passive observer but should do more to ensure its own security.
The fact that the United States has started negotiations with Russia does not mean that anything can change. And for us, this is a signal that European countries, including the Czech Republic, will take new steps that are absolutely necessary in today's situation. It is equally unacceptable to me that Ukraine or Europe is being dictated a new security order. We must be able to defend ourselves against this, and this will require action. Jan Lipavsky, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, in an interview with Novinka.
According to NBC News, citing US intelligence sources and several members of Congress, Putin has no real interest in reaching a genuine peace agreement in Ukraine. At the same time as the Trump administration begins its first negotiations with Russian officials regarding ending the war in Ukraine, according to the US TV channel, Politico reports suggest that Putin might finally be willing to come to the negotiation table. One of the key reasons Moscow is running out of money to fund the war.
The Kremlin has no plan D to finance its budget deficit, raising questions about its ability to fund the war. From this perspective, fiscal breathing room could well be what Putin is really looking for in his talks with the U.S., whether through sanctions relief, for instance, relaxing U.S. restrictions on Russia's ability to place external debt, or a pause in the conflict, which would allow Moscow to replenish its coffers via a reduction in defense spending. Agathe Desmarais, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, in the article for Politico.
On February 18th, US and Russian officials held talks in Riyadh. Among the participants were US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The parties agreed to begin negotiations on ending the war against Ukraine at the appropriate time and to establish a consultation mechanism between the two countries.
President Trump spoke to Vladimir Putin last week, and in it, Vladimir Putin expressed his interest in peace, and the president expressed his desire to see an end to this conflict in a way that was enduring and that protected Ukrainian sovereignty, and that was an enduring peace, not that we're going to have another invasion in 3 or 4 years. That's a good call. Now, obviously, it has to be followed up by action. So the next few weeks and days will determine whether it's serious or not.
Until a ceasefire agreement is signed, we will continue to hear this strange, sometimes even pro-Russian rhetoric, because for Trump, the sooner the shooting stops, the better. He wants to raise his hands in victory and say, "I ended another war."
On February 27th, US-Russia negotiations took place in Istanbul. The closed-door talks lasted 6.5 hours, and the Russian delegation left without giving any comments. Reported by Katerina Bastun, KD, UATV News.
Russia, whose economy has been fully mobilized for war, is now spending more on defense than all European nations combined, including the United Kingdom. These findings come from the Military Balance Report conducted by the UK-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. Russia's total defense expenditures have surged by 42%, reaching 13 trillion rubles, equivalent to $462 billion. In comparison, the combined defense budgets of European nations, including the UK and EU member states, increased by nearly 12% last year, falling $5 billion short of Moscow's military spending.
A study conducted by a Harvard Kennedy School analyst in collaboration with J.P. Morgan and other investment banks revealed that under pressure from the military lobby, Russia's defense industry has received nearly $300 billion in loans from the banking system, loans it is unable to repay. This means either banks go bankrupt or someone has to cover these losses. The burden falls on either the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, which leads to inflation.
Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War point out that the Kremlin is prolonging an information campaign to obscure the negative effects of the war in Ukraine on Russia's economy. Experts note that Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin recently claimed in a meeting with Putin that Russia's GDP has reached a historic high, growing by 4%, while inflation for 2024 stood at nearly 10%. However, analysts argue these figures are significantly understated.
Russia's true inflation is quite higher than the official statistics the Kremlin is willing to publicize, however. Several studies indicate that Russia's inflation rate is closer to 20%. Ms. Houston and Putin notably did not mention how the Russian central bank raised the interest rate to 21% in October 2024, or how Russia has been drawing from its National Welfare Fund to finance its war effort over the last 3 years. The liquidity portion of Russia's National Welfare Fund may run out by fall 2025. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
Experts forecast that in 2025 Russia's military expenditures will increase by more than 13%, reaching 15.6 trillion rubles. Despite the strain on its economy, Russia remains capable of sustaining such high wartime expenditures, the IISS notes. However, Russia's budget deficit has skyrocketed, growing 14 times larger compared to January last year due to a sharp rise in spending that has already surpassed the annual target, reports the Moscow Times.
In January, expenditures, according to preliminary estimates, were higher than revenues by 1,710 billion rubles, or 0.8% of GDP, compared with the budgeted deficit for the year of 1,170 billion rubles, or 0.5% of GDP. A year ago in January, the budget was implemented with a deficit of 124 billion rubles, from the Moscow Times publication.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the country's annual budget deficit has consistently exceeded 3 trillion rubles, around 2% of GDP. The Russian Ministry of Finance has attempted to cover this gap through domestic borrowing and by withdrawals from the National Wealth Fund, whose available reserves have already been reduced by 2/3.
Gazprom's economy is deflating, along with enterprises that cannot cover their losses. They will be bailed out using the state budget and the central bank. This means taking money out of Russians' pockets and redirecting it to enterprises that cannot repay their loans. These companies are being rescued, allowing them to continue living lavishly.
Эксперты отмечают, что европейцы могут столкнуться с серьезными вызовами в сфере безопасности, если Соединенные Штаты сократят поддержку Украины и Европы. Президент США Дональд Трамп неоднократно заявлял, что страны Европы должны увеличить свои оборонные расходы до 5% ВВП. Сейчас они не дотягивают до 2%. Генеральный секретарь НАТО Марк Рютте считает, что европейские расходы на оборону должны вырасти до 3%. Виктория Смирнова для телеканала Freedom.
Reported by Serhiy Kulyas, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.